There are moments in life when we stand at the edge of surrender, convinced that a certain person can never change, never return, never become what they were meant to be. We look at their failures, their wounds, their endless disappointments, and quietly decide that our hope has been wasted. But God often works in places where human expectations have already been buried. Heaven has a curious habit of lingering over people whom the world has long since abandoned. The soul you are tempted to give up on may be standing in the very workshop of divine grace, though at present all you can hear is the sound of hammers and all you can see is dust. What if the person you have written off is not a finished story but an unfinished chapter? What if God's silence is not his absence, and his delay is not his refusal? And what if, at this very moment, the Lord is speaking directly to your weary heart and saying, "Don't you dare give up on this person, I am still at work." There is something deeply humbling about being human. We are creatures of sight. We trust what can be measured, touched, and immediately observed. When we look at a person's life and see no improvement, no repentance, no visible change, we naturally conclude that nothing is happening. We assume that silence means abandonment and delay means failure. Yet again and again, the ways of God challenge these conclusions. A seed buried in the ground appears lifeless. To an impatient observer, it seems to have disappeared entirely. But beneath the soil, hidden from every eye, a mystery is taking place. The seed is breaking open. Roots are reaching downward. Life is preparing itself in secret before it ever becomes visible. God's work often resembles this hidden process. The Lord is not limited by what we can perceive. His greatest works frequently begin in places where human vision cannot penetrate. He works within thoughts that no one hears, convictions that no one sees, and struggles that no one understands. A person's heart may be engaged in a fierce battle known only to God. Questions may be arising in their mind. Memories may be stirring in their soul. Convictions may be awakening during quiet moments that no audience ever witnesses. The tragedy is that we often judge the entire story by one chapter. We look at someone's present condition and mistake it for their permanent destiny. We assume that because they have resisted change until now, they always will. We interpret their failures as final verdicts rather than temporary conditions. In doing so, we forget that God sees dimensions of reality that remain hidden from us. The Lord works with patience because he sees the whole picture at once. He sees where a person has been, where they are, and where they can become through his grace. He sees wounds that explain certain behaviors, fears that create resistance, and longings buried beneath layers of disappointment. His understanding penetrates far beyond outward appearances. There are moments when God appears inactive, precisely because he is doing his deepest work. Builders sometimes spend long periods laying foundations that remain completely invisible. Passers-by may wonder why nothing seems to be happening. Yet the strength of the structure depends upon labor that cannot be admired because it cannot yet be seen. Many of God's preparations occur in hidden places. Joseph spent years in obscurity before his elevation. Moses lived in the wilderness long before his public calling emerged. David was a shepherd before he became a king. The visible moment of transformation often rests upon countless unseen moments of divine preparation. This truth requires humility from us because it forces us to admit that our perspective is limited. We cannot enter another person's heart. We cannot fully understand the conversations that may be occurring between their conscience and God. We cannot measure the silent work of grace, the quiet movement of conviction, or the gradual softening of a hardened spirit. God's work often unfolds with a slowness that tests human faith. We prefer immediate results because they reassure us that our hopes have not been misplaced. But heaven frequently moves according to rhythms that cannot be hurried. The Lord is never rushed by our impatience, nor discouraged by circumstances that seem impossible to us. He remains at work even when there is no outward evidence to satisfy our desire for certainty. The hiddenness of God's activity does not indicate his absence. The silence of heaven does not mean heaven is indifferent. The fact that we cannot trace his hand does not mean his hand is still. The Creator who forms stars in distant galaxies and causes flowers to bloom in secret places has never depended upon human observation in order to accomplish his purposes. One of the most persistent temptations of the human heart is to divide people into two categories, those who seem redeemable and those who seem beyond hope. We reserve our prayers, our patience, and our expectations for the first group, while quietly abandoning the second. We look at repeated failures, hardened attitudes, destructive choices, and years of disappointment, and we conclude that certain souls have traveled too far to ever find their way back. Yet this conclusion reveals more about the limits of human imagination than it does about the power of divine grace. Grace, by its very nature, seeks what appears lost. It moves toward brokenness rather than away from it. It does not merely assist the worthy or improve the respectable. It descends into the darkest places of human need and begins its mysterious work there. If grace only operated where goodness already existed, it would cease to be grace altogether. There is something remarkable about God's way of looking at people. Where we see failures, he sees possibilities. Where we see wasted years, he sees a story that is still being written. Where we see scars, he sees places where healing may yet occur. Divine grace possesses an extraordinary ability to look upon a human soul and perceive more than its present condition. The history of faith is filled with people who appeared to be unlikely candidates for transformation. Some were proud, some violent, some selfish, and others deeply confused. Their lives contained mistakes that seemed too serious and habits that appeared too firmly established. Yet the hand of God reached into circumstances that looked beyond repair and awakened something entirely new within them. Human beings often underestimate grace because they misunderstand the nature of change. We tend to believe that transformation must happen gradually according to our expectations. We assume that years of resistance require years of recovery and that stubborn hearts cannot suddenly soften. But grace does not operate according to ordinary calculations. It can accomplish in a moment what human effort could not produce in decades. A person may appear entirely indifferent while hidden questions are quietly emerging within them. They may seem resistant while their conscience is becoming increasingly restless. They may continue walking familiar paths while inwardly feeling a growing dissatisfaction with everything that once seemed sufficient. The movements of grace frequently begin beneath the surface, long before they become visible in conduct. God's dealings with people are often more patient than ours because his understanding is deeper than ours. He sees influences we do not see and wounds we do not understand. He knows the disappointments that shaped a person's fears and the experiences that contributed to their hardness. Divine grace never excuses evil, but it comprehends the complexity of the human condition with perfect wisdom. There is also a curious tendency in us to define people by their worst moments. We treat certain failures as permanent identities. We remember what someone did and begin to believe that what they did is all they are. Yet God continually refuses to reduce people to the lowest point of their story. He addresses souls that have wandered, rebelled, and failed, not as discarded ruins, but as beings still bearing his image. The reach of divine grace extends beyond the boundaries that human judgment establishes. It is not intimidated by long histories of failure, by hardened habits, or by repeated disappointments. It enters situations that appear hopeless and works with a patience and power that frequently confounds human expectations. Perhaps the most astonishing feature of grace is its refusal to surrender. It pursues, invites, convicts, and calls. It knocks upon doors that seem permanently closed and whispers to hearts that appear entirely unmoved. It continues its work in places where every observer has already concluded that nothing more can be done. It remains active around people whom others have abandoned and continues seeking those who have spent years running from the very mercy that follows them. Nothing is more difficult for the human spirit than waiting. We are creatures who long for swift resolutions. When we pray, we hope for immediate answers. When we love someone, we desire instant change. When we entrust a situation to God, we secretly expect that his intervention will become visible within a reasonable period of time. The longer the delay continues, the more vulnerable we become to disappointment and doubt. Delays have a peculiar effect upon the heart. They tempt us to believe that nothing is happening. They persuade us that our prayers have risen no higher than the ceiling and that our hopes have been quietly forgotten. Time itself begins to feel like evidence against us. Every passing day appears to strengthen the case for despair, yet divine delays are often misunderstood because we assume that God measures time in the same way we do. We think in terms of urgency and convenience, but God thinks in terms of wisdom and purpose. We are occupied with immediate relief, while he is concerned with eternal realities. We desire quick answers because we see only the present moment. God can afford to wait because he sees the entire landscape of history at once. A child frequently mistakes delay for neglect. The parent says not yet, and the child hears, I do not care, yet the parent may be acting out of deeper understanding. There may be circumstances the child cannot comprehend and dangers the child cannot foresee. The refusal to act immediately may arise not from indifference but from wisdom. In much the same way, divine delays are not necessarily signs of divine absence. The fact that God has not moved according to our preferred timetable does not mean He has abandoned the matter altogether. Heaven's clock often operates according to rhythms that remain hidden from human understanding. There are seasons in life when God appears silent while important work is unfolding beneath the surface. Circumstances may be shifting in ways we cannot observe. Hearts may be softening through experiences that seem unrelated. Convictions may be growing quietly in places beyond our knowledge. Events that appear random to us may be part of a larger pattern known fully only to God. The delay itself may also be accomplishing something within us. Waiting exposes our assumptions and reveals the conditions of our hearts. It uncovers our desire for control and our dependence upon visible evidence. We discover how much of our peace has rested not upon trust in God, but upon our ability to predict outcomes. Delay teaches us to surrender conclusions that we have formed too quickly and to live with unanswered questions. God's timing often appears mysterious because His purposes are larger than the specific answer we seek. He is rarely dealing with only one person, one event, or one problem at a time. His providence extends across countless lives and circumstances, weaving together threads that seem entirely unrelated from our limited perspective. What appears to us as delay may in fact be precise coordination beyond anything we could imagine. There is also a danger in receiving things before we are prepared for them. Immediate answers are not always beneficial, simply because they are immediate. Certain blessings require preparation. Certain transformations require deeper foundations. Certain changes must unfold slowly, because rapid alterations would fail to endure. The natural tendency of the human heart is to conclude that delay equals denial. Yet some of the most remarkable moments in life arrive only after periods of waiting that once seemed unbearable. Looking backward, we occasionally discover that what we interpreted as divine silence was actually divine preparation. What appeared to be inactivity was careful workmanship hidden from our understanding. The Lord is never pressured by the fears that trouble us, nor hurried by the conclusions that arise from our impatience. He remains sovereign over every moment and every circumstance. His delays are never careless pauses, forgotten promises, or signs of diminished concern. They often belong to a wisdom that sees farther than we can see, and knows precisely when a door should open and when it should remain closed a little longer. Love is a beautiful thing when it is met with gratitude, kindness, and visible progress. It is comparatively easy to care for people who appreciate our efforts and respond to our concern. Hope flourishes naturally when every sign seems encouraging and every step appears to move in the right direction. But love reveals its true character not in moments of ease but in seasons of disappointment. There comes a point in many relationships when optimism begins to fade. The person we have prayed for remains unchanged. The individual we have encouraged continues making destructive choices. The one we have believed in seems determined to repeat the same mistakes. Gradually, the heart grows weary. The burden of caring begins to feel heavier than before, and hope itself starts to resemble a form of foolishness. It is precisely at this point that love encounters its greatest test. Human affection often survives as long as there are signs of success. We endure difficulties because we believe our efforts are producing results. We forgive because we expect improvement. We continue hoping because we imagine that change is near. But when all visible evidence disappears, something within us begins to ask whether our love has been misplaced. The temptation is not merely to stop helping. The deeper temptation is to stop caring. We begin to protect ourselves from further disappointment by lowering our expectations and withdrawing our emotional investment. The heart reasons that if it expects nothing, it can no longer be wounded by unmet hopes. Yet authentic love possesses a curious endurance. It continues to recognize value even when circumstances provide little encouragement. It sees more than present failures and refuses to define a person entirely by their worst decisions. Love acknowledges painful realities without surrendering to despair. This endurance is difficult because loving another person always involves vulnerability. To care deeply about someone is to expose oneself to uncertainty and disappointment. Their choices affect us. Their struggles become our burdens. Their pain disturbs our peace. Every setback threatens to diminish our confidence and exhaust our patience. The greatest challenge comes when repeated disappointments accumulate over time. A single failure can often be forgiven easily, but continual failure gradually wears upon the spirit. One unanswered prayer may strengthen determination, while years of unanswered prayers can tempt even faithful hearts toward resignation. Love begins to ask questions it never wished to ask. It wonders whether its sacrifices have been in vain, and whether continued hope serves any meaningful purpose. Yet there is something profoundly significant about remaining steadfast precisely when circumstances appear least deserving of it. Love that persists in such moments ceases to depend entirely upon visible outcomes. It becomes an act of faith rather than mere emotional preference. It chooses to remain present even when certainty has disappeared. The endurance of love does not require pretending that everything is fine. It does not ignore painful truths or deny the seriousness of another person's actions. Genuine love sees reality with remarkable clarity. It recognizes failures, wounds, and consequences. Yet even while seeing these things, it refuses to surrender entirely to hopelessness. Part of love's greatness lies in its refusal to make final judgments too quickly. Human beings are constantly changing creatures. Hearts that appear completely hardened may yet soften. Individuals who seem incapable of transformation may surprise everyone who knows them. Stories that appear finished may still contain chapters that have not yet been written. Love is tested most severely when there is little reason to continue believing. It is easy to stand beside someone during seasons of triumph and progress. The greater challenge is remaining faithful during long periods of confusion and disappointment. In those difficult moments, love is stripped of easy encouragements and comfortable assurances. It must choose whether it values another person's worth enough to endure uncertainty and carry hope when every visible sign seems to argue against it. Human beings possess a remarkable ability to recognize what is broken. We can quickly identify shattered relationships, wasted opportunities, and lives that appear to have drifted beyond repair. We observe the ruins left by poor choices, painful experiences, and repeated failures, and we instinctively conclude that some situations are simply too damaged to be restored. There comes a point, we imagine, where the pieces are too scattered and the losses too severe for anything meaningful to emerge again. This way of thinking seems reasonable because our experience is limited. We know how difficult it is to repair what has been fractured. Trust, once broken, is not easily regained. Habits formed over many years are not easily abandoned. Wounds carried for a lifetime do not disappear merely because we wish them away. We live in a world where many things once damaged never return to their original condition. Yet the work of God continually challenges these assumptions. The Lord has always demonstrated a curious preference for entering situations that appear impossible. He moves toward places where human resources have been exhausted and where ordinary explanations no longer seem adequate. Again and again, divine activity appears most vividly in circumstances that have already been judged hopeless by human standards. Part of the difficulty lies in our tendency to confuse God's possibilities with our own abilities. We measure situations according to our strength, our wisdom, and our understanding. When we cannot imagine a solution, we assume that no solution exists. When we can see no path forward, we conclude that none can be found. Our imagination reaches its limit, and we mistake that limit for reality itself. But divine power is not constrained by human calculations. God does not look upon broken situations with the same despair that often overwhelms us. He sees beyond present appearances and recognizes possibilities hidden from our understanding. Circumstances that seem completely closed to us remain entirely open to Him. The Lord is not surprised by complications, discouraged by failures, or intimidated by conditions that appear irreversible. Brokenness itself often becomes the very place where grace performs its deepest work. There is something about human weakness that creates opportunities for dependence and surrender. People frequently discover truths in seasons of loss that prosperity could never have taught them. Pride may crumble where suffering enters. Self-sufficiency may yield where disappointment persists. Hearts that once seemed impenetrable may become receptive through experiences that expose their need. The same principle can be seen in relationships and personal struggles. Situations that appear ruined often contain possibilities invisible to hurried observation. Time may accomplish what arguments never could. Pain may awaken understanding where comfort failed. A season of apparent collapse may become the beginning of genuine transformation. One of the great obstacles to hope is the finality with which we judge present circumstances. We assume that because something looks impossible today, it will remain impossible tomorrow. We take a temporary condition and elevate it into a permanent verdict. In doing so, we forget how limited our perspective truly is. Human history is filled with examples of unexpected restorations and surprising reversals. People have emerged from failures that seemed decisive, Relationships have been healed after years of estrangement. Individuals once trapped in destructive patterns have found entirely new directions. These events often astonish observers precisely because they contradict ordinary expectations. God's work frequently possesses this element of surprise. He delights in accomplishing things that exceed human predictions. Not because he enjoys confounding people for its own sake, but because such moments reveal that hope ultimately rests not upon human ability, but upon divine power. The Lord specializes in places where hope appears exhausted. He enters confusion with wisdom, weakness with strength, and brokenness with redeeming purpose. He is able to perceive possibilities hidden within shattered circumstances, and to draw meaning from situations that seem entirely devoid of it. His grace continually moves among ruins, touching lives that appear beyond recovery and working patiently within conditions that others have already abandoned as impossible. There is a peculiar sadness in discovering that something wonderful was taking place just beyond the limits of our patience. Few things trouble the human heart more than realizing that we abandoned hope moments before a breakthrough arrived. We have all experienced situations in which perseverance seemed pointless until later events revealed that unseen progress had been occurring all along. The temptation to give up usually does not arrive suddenly. It comes quietly and gradually. It begins with disappointment, grows through repeated frustrations, and eventually settles into resignation. At first we merely question whether our efforts matter. Then we begin lowering our expectations. Finally, we arrive at the dangerous conclusion that nothing will ever change. This process often feels entirely reasonable. We tell ourselves that we are simply accepting reality. We believe we are being practical rather than pessimistic. We interpret our surrender as wisdom acquired through experience. Yet there is a difference between facing reality honestly and reaching conclusions that exceed the evidence available to us. Human beings possess remarkably limited knowledge. We are incapable of seeing all that is taking place in another person's heart. We cannot fully understand the experiences shaping their thoughts or the hidden struggles influencing their decisions. We are equally unable to perceive the countless ways in which God may be at work beyond our observation. Because our vision is incomplete, our judgments are frequently premature. A traveler walking through a forest at night sees only a few feet ahead. The darkness creates the impression that little exists beyond the narrow circle of light. Yet the unseen landscape remains present despite being hidden. Mountains, rivers, and pathways continue to exist whether they are visible or not. In much the same way, realities often exist beyond the boundaries of our immediate perception. The danger of giving up too soon lies precisely here. We mistake our inability to see progress for evidence that no progress exists. We assume that because change has not appeared according to our expectations, change is impossible altogether. We convert uncertainty into final conclusions. God's work often unfolds in ways that resist immediate observation. Deep transformations rarely occur with the speed and visibility we prefer. Human souls are complex. Wounds accumulated over many years may require patient healing. Convictions may grow gradually. Understanding may emerge through experiences that appear entirely unrelated to the outcome we desire. Sometimes people seem completely unchanged, while important developments are occurring beneath the surface. Questions may be arising within them that they have never previously considered. Long-accepted assumptions may be weakening. Dissatisfaction with old patterns may be increasing. The conscience may be stirring in quiet moments invisible to everyone else. The same principle applies to circumstances that seem permanently fixed. Events often move according to patterns hidden from our understanding. Relationships may be influenced by conversations we never hear and experiences we never witness. Opportunities may be developing in places entirely beyond our awareness. Connections between events frequently become clear only when viewed in retrospect. One reason miracles often surprise people is that they tend to emerge after hope has nearly disappeared. Human expectation reaches its limit, concludes that nothing more can happen, and then suddenly encounters possibilities it had never imagined. What appeared impossible was often developing quietly, while everyone assumed the story had ended. Giving up too soon may also deprive us of the lessons that waiting itself was meant to teach. Patience forms qualities within us that immediate answers cannot produce. Endurance enlarges our capacity for trust. Hope exercised in difficult circumstances deepens our understanding of dependence upon God. Perseverance changes not only the situations we are concerned about, but also the people we ourselves are becoming. There are moments when the most significant developments occur precisely when everything appears motionless. Seeds germinate underground, foundations are laid beneath the surface, and preparations take place in hidden places. Much of God's finest workmanship occurs beyond the reach of human observation. To surrender completely in such moments is to risk abandoning hope, while grace continues its quiet labor, and while possibilities remain alive that only eternity may fully reveal.